Welcome. This is the lecture I gave within the scope of the Soteria project in the International Summer School on Biometrics of Alghero in June 2022. It is a lecture on privacy and identity, and notably it is on the definition of privacy. What is privacy? And given that this is the topic, let's start with one definition of privacy, not one of the most recent ones, but it is very helpful. Privacy is the condition of not having undocumented personal information known or possessed by others. Why it is that helpful to me? Because it makes very clear the concept that privacy is personal information. Probably, if you are an engineer or a technologist, you are familiar with the idea that privacy concerns personal data protection. This is the standard conception of privacy today. In my presentation, I will argue that this approach is not correct. It is misleading and ends up by making to overlook some important aspects of privacy. The personal data is a very complex issue. The world of personal data is a real ecosystem which includes very different actors, many layers, many different aspects. I will not discuss them now because they are not in the scope of my presentation. I would like just to show you this picture to give you the impression, the sensation of the richness of the world of personal data. But let's try to go a bit more in depth and try to understand what is exactly personal data. Well, personal data is data about a person. This is obvious, it is tautological. Information about a person. But what kind of information? I could tell that Mr. So-and-so is a very smart person. This is personal information. This is a qualitative information. I'm describing an attribute, a quality of Mr. So-and-so, which is the quality to be smart. Has this piece of information a value? Yes, it has. It can happen that a company call me and ask, Emilio, do you know Mr. So-and-so? Yes, I know him. Well, what do you think of him? Oh, I can tell you, but you have to pay me because I am providing you with the confidential information. So, it makes sense. Information has a value. But how much does it value the information about Mr. So-and-so? He is smart. It's very difficult to understand the value. It is very difficult. And how it is objective. I can be biased by my knowledge of Mr. So-and-so in particular circumstances, so on. So, qualitative information has always existed, but it is very difficult to be traded, very difficult to measure, very difficult, almost impossible to value. It is difficult to handle in general. But what we are able to do now, what we can do now is turning the qualitative information into quantitative information, that is to say, into data. Then I can describe a series of patterns which which describe the fact that Mr. So-and-so is smart. So this is not a word, an adjective, an attribute, smart, but it becomes some behaviors that I classify and turn into digits. And then these digital codes, these patterns transformed into digits can be marketed, can be transferred, can be shared, can be sold. What I did, what I made, I succeeded in turning qualitative information, difficult to handle, difficult to trade, difficult to market, into quantitative information, which is a commodity. And actually, this is the essence of the digital revolution, or information revolution, the data revolution. There are different names to call the same event, which is the fact that we learned, thanks to new sensor technologies, thanks to our computing capacity, data handling and data processing capacities, data storage, etc., etc. But thanks to technological innovation, generally speaking, we succeeded in turning most qualitative information into quantitative information, notably information about the person, which was in the past chiefly qualitative, smart, intelligent, idiot, nice. Everything can be now expressed with digits, or at least we are trying to do it. It's not many behavioral aspects still escape from biometrics, but the idea is that sooner or later will be able to express almost everything in digits. Only twice before now it happened something similar in the history of the human species, at least as far as I know. For almost around 1 million of years, human species was had an economy based on hunting and gathering, mostly hunter-gatherers society. Humans were nomadic, were small groups, nomadic. They developed across centuries and millennia. They developed some technology, even refined technology, knowledge about plant life, technology for hunting. They were not barbarians, but they didn't know anything but natural items, plants, vegetables, animals to be hunted. Well, some 5,000, 6,000 years ago, it arrived the first huge revolution in the human history, which was the revolution which started what we call human history. And this was the agricultural revolution. The agricultural revolution, called also by scholars Neolithic revolution, was an event marked by domestication of wild plants and animals. Domestication is a technology. So they developed the technology, the innovation concerning domestication. And this changed everything. They stopped being nomadic. The first villages appeared, and villages meant trade between different communities, the need of personal identification, the need of a monetary system, a way to pay, exchange of product. But everything originated from this essential, fundamental event, the birth of farming product. And what were farming products? Farming products were animals and plants turned into commodities. Animal and plants, which were natural items that anyone could take, became something owned by the farmer, and then the farmer could market them. They became commodities. And something similar happened in the 18th century with the Industrial Revolution. Even in the Industrial Revolution, we invented a new commodity. We took something already existent, a natural item, and we turned such a natural item into a commodity, creating a huge surplus of value in society, of richness, which was in turn a driver for further innovation, etc., etc. And what was the natural item turned into commodity was human labor. Human labor has always existed. You have always paid human labor. But what, before the Industrial Revolution, what did they purchase? They purchased the physical force, the physical power. They purchased the skills. They purchased the knowledge. They purchased the body, the manual activity. But the idea that you could sell your time was unthinkable. In the Industrial Revolution, people started selling their working hours, their working time. And this was possible because of a technological innovation, which was the mechanical clock. The mechanical clock was invented actually some centuries before the Industrial Revolution, but were very rare, were very large, big, cumbersome. But in the 18th century, mechanical clock became common, not so expensive, small, and they were used by many people. And the factory system, which is the essential element, the fundamental, the basic element of the Industrial Revolution, the factory system, is completely based on the idea of time, precise measuration of time. And this is possible thanks to the mechanical clock. From that moment on, workers sold their time. And each human being, everybody, discovered to have a commodity to sell. You have nothing, you can do nothing, you have no skills, no matter. Are you alive? Yes. So it means that you have time. Sell your time. And the working class is the class, the proletariat is the class who has anything else to sell but their time. And it is not by chance that at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, Benjamin Franklin, the American polymath, invented this saying, which is very famous, everybody knows it, which is time is money. But it was invented by Benjamin Franklin at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Before the Industrial Revolution, no one could invent such a saying. This is the mark of the Industrial Revolution. And the Information Revolution made something very, very close. with the information revolution, we turned, as I told you earlier, we turned qualitative information into quantitative information, into digital data. So we transformed information into a commodity. And today, one can easily say that information is money. And actually, one of the source, probably one of the most important source of economic value in our society is money. Think that most of our economy, at least in Western countries, is a financial economy. Financial economy is purely information. There is no other items behind the financial markets. Financial market is information, and it is the essence of the modern economy. So the confusion between privacy and data protection and personal data protection is misleading because it is putting together apple and oranges. And the consequence is to generate a technical conception of privacy framed in terms of risk management, technical ability to protect or to penetrate information. And the obvious consequence has been that privacy today is mostly dealt with by lawyers, legal departments, and so on. I do love lawyers and legal departments. But I don't think it is the right way. And a further consequence is that concern identity identification, because the idea that privacy means personal data protection has led to think that anonymity is the privacy golden standard, and the right to be anonymous is the paradigm of the notion of privacy. And as a sign of that is that we took the mask as a symbol of the right to privacy. The anonymous movement Anonymous, selected the mask as a sign of their rebellion, they fight against the surveillance society, the society where everyone is identifiable with the biometrics identifier and so on. And the mask was taken as a symbol of this rebellion of citizens against the dictatorship of information. No, forget it. This is very laudable, but it is wrong. So, the first message I want to convey you is personal data is about an economic asset. Privacy is about something else. And then we will see together what is about. But for now, keep these two ideas, these two notions distinct. It is not something new. The Charter of the Fundamental Rights of the European Union, for instance, has two different articles. One, Article 7, protects privacy. Another, Article 8, protects personal data. So the notion that personal data and privacy are not the same thing is not new at all. But the main issue is that while personal data has a clear definition, privacy has not. So people are not at ease to handle the notion of privacy. At the end of the day, they prefer to use, in particular technologists, engineers, prefer to use the notion personal data because it's more understandable, it's more practically understandable, and has more immediate consequences on their job. But I repeat, the first point, keep distinct these two notions. In my presentation, I will argue that privacy is still connected to the person and then to identity, but in a quite different way. And at this point, it is the moment when I can provide my first definition of privacy. I will provide at the end of this presentation 3 definitions, and the last one will include all the 3. My first definition is privacy is a special attribute of a place. It is a bit enigmatic definition. Place can be a physical place, can be a metaphorical place, mental space, a temporal period. These are places as well. My definition of privacy comes from, first of all, comes from the etymology, because the word privacy derives from the Latin privatus, which comes from the verb privo, I deprive, I put away. So in practice, privacy refers to the state of something that is separated, secluded from others. It refers to the state of being set apart, belonging to oneself, in contrast to the state of being public or common. What is the origin? What was the origin of this idea of a separate, secluded area? Something which is set apart. Why? To understand this, we should start with a definition of place and space. There are many scholarly definitions. I don't want to bore you with them. Just the easiest one. Place is humanized space. It's a space organized by human beings, structured by human beings. Space is space. It's just a formless area. A city is a place. The desert is a space. The ocean is space. A village is a place. That's clear? Okay. So, places are ordered areas, while space are formless. At least they are formed by forces, unknown powers, not by humans. The origin of this idea is a metaphysic religious idea, which aimed to explain the birth of the universe. In most world religions, especially in the Western religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, the idea, and the Greek and Roman religions earlier, the idea is that at the very beginning there was space, formless space. Ancient Greek called it chaos. The ancient Jewish, the Hebrew Bible call it tohu, even the sound. It is the empty abyss. And creation, the birth of the world, of the universe, is when God or gods put in order, give orders to the space, creating a place for humans. Think of Genesis, the birth, the 7 days during which God created the world. And something similar was the main activity of priest at the very beginning. Holy man, wise man, priest, the officers of the ancient religions had first the task to organize space and to divide holy space, called sacred, and public space, which is human space, the place for human and the place for God. The sacred space is a place for God. Sacred, this is interesting enough, sacred in Latin meant exactly the same of privatus, of private. Cut away, it was different verbs to meaning the same thing. Sacred, private, exactly the same meaning, cut away, secluded. And actually, the first temple, the temples where the buildings where gods are expected to live, to stay when they are on the earth, the first temple were created by the priest. This is the ceremony in ancient Roman religion, were created by the priest only by gesture. In a night with the moon, a clear night, they went into forest searching for an area, a free area in the forest. And then with a stick, the priest first carved an area in the sky, indicating the sky. And then in the sky, it divided in two parts. The fast part, which was the part pleasant to the gods, and the nefas part, which was the part unpleasant to the god. Then there was a further division among the higher parts devoted to the god of events, and a lower part devoted to the infernal gods, to the gods of the netherworld. Then they did something similar on the Earth's surface. And the fast part, the holy part, the part devoted to gods, was the primordial temple. Then at a certain moment, in this area, you couldn't enter. This was an area devoted only to gods. It was a sacred area. It was prohibited to everyone to enter. There was a mana, there was a power within that area, and you could die if you enter in that area. Only after long purification process, only a few priests could enter. But it was very, very difficult to have the permission to enter. Then, little by little, this was not only a symbol, but they put stones, and then they created temples, as we see now in the archaeological areas. We find ancient Roman temples, also Greek temples, and you know as they are. And something very close was performed in the Roman family to delimitate, to create the private space for the family. You should not think of a Roman family as a father, mother, and two children. Roman family was a company. It was a clan, it was a tribe. There was tens, hundreds of people who were included in the family: clients, customers, servants, relatives, very far relatives. They are part of the clan, they're part of the family. And the lord of the family is the boss of the company. So, and he describes the area, which is the area for the family. And it is the private area. And the private area, so the difference between the temple and the family is that the private area is owned by the Lord, is the secluded area for the Lord. The sacred area is the secluded area for God. But it is exactly the same things. Change the owner. And you could still find traces of this idea, because today we probably don't feel very familiar the idea of religious root of privacy, but the saying, so-called castle law, a man's home is his castle, which implies the idea that the private area should be inviolable. It is something more, an issue of ownership, of legal issue. Is something which immediately reminds and echoes the idea of a private space as a sacred space, a space that should not be trespassed. And this is still in my second definition of privacy, which is not mine. It is a famous definition, one of the first ones, and it is the definition provided by an American judge, a politician, journalist, Louis Brandeis. And Louis Brandeis provided this famous definition of privacy, I agree with completely, which is the right to be left alone. Privacy is the right to be left alone. And the right to be left alone somehow implies the idea of the secluded space, the sacred space, the private space in which no one should enter if you do not give permission. And if you want to stay alone in that place, you have the right to do it. Unfortunately, the idea of a private place as a secure harbor, a safe harbor, a place where to take refuge, to us immediately implies the idea that the private space should be invisible, should be hidden. So, what is public is visible, what is private is invisible. Most of us, probably all of us, have this kind of mental association. I told unfortunately, because it is not right. So, let me show you a picture where nothing is hidden. Everything is apparent, is public. Okay. Look at this picture. This is a picture taken in a forest of Lauers, Saxony, in Germany. In this picture, there is a nice lady, a model called Nadine, nude. She is not hidden. She is visible, definitely visible. So, find Nadine. Okay, I gave you some time to do it. Now, I show you Nadine. Yes, she is Nadine. Can you see her now? This is a military technique called camouflage. Nadine is not hidden. Nadine is completely visible, but you can't see her. It is your eyes that don't see her. She is visible, but you don't see. And why? Because she's blended with the surroundings. She does not emerge from the background. But she's still visible. And a demonstration of this concept, it is that she is visible because she is not masked. If Nadine were masked, so if Nadine were hidden, you could immediately see her. You know? You see? Imagine Nadine with a mask. Immediately, she emerged from the background. Okay, this was Leo DiCaprio, but I don't want to speak of Leo DiCaprio. I want to speak of the character that he played, the Sun King. And I want to speak of him for at least two reasons. The first one, because the period, as you have seen in this short video, the period, the Baroque period, was a period in which masks were used in all public events and ceremonies. Masks were part of the normal dressing of noble people. It was a sign of kindness, of nobility. It is the gentleman and lady dressed a mask. And but the real reason I want to mention you the Sun King is that the Sun King has been probably the man, the human being in the human history with less private life. He had no private life at all. From the very beginning of this day, from the awakening ceremony, the Sun King decided to be on the stage. It was completely public. You should imagine that the getting up ceremony was the public made around of 100 people, noble people. It was this is an honor to be admitted to see the getting up ceremony. And from that moment on, no 1 second of his day was private. But the result is that we don't know Louis, the man, which was the Sun King. We only know the character, the Sun King. So the Sun King was always masked. He was a character on the stage. It was his mask. We don't know who was. There are libraries devoted to the Sun King, but they are devoted to the public character. No one knows. We ignore who was behind the mask. So, Privacy is about masking, but masking is not about hiding, disguising. It is about revealing, exposing, but revealing and exposing what you decide that others should know of you. And this is the second point I ask you to retain from my presentation. And to make it easier to understand and to provide some roots to this idea, this concept, think of Roman actors, the actors of ancient Roman theater. They wore masks during the whole representation. There are many cultural reasons for this, like in other cultures, like Japanese culture, they wore masks. But skip it. Just focus on practical needs. Practically speaking, actors needed to make themselves recognizable in very large amphitheaters which might host more than 1,000 people. So you should imagine people in the last rank. They couldn't see almost anything, and they in particular, they couldn't see the face. So to recognize actors, to recognize characters, masks were fundamental, because they allowed people, even very distant people, to recognize the character. And then masks were made in such a way to amplify the voice, like a megaphone. So masks gave actors a voice and a face, an identity and a voice. And interestingly enough, our word person, you know what person means, individuals, etc. Our word person comes from the Latin persona. But what was persona? Persona was the theatrical mask. The Latin word persona originally meant the theatrical mask. Then, at a certain moment, Romans started using the word persona metaphorically to indicate also individuals. And we took this last usage of the word persona. So for us, person is the individual. But at the very beginning, the person was the mask. And this is so as true as in Roman culture and in the ancient world culture, even in Greece, it was negative to be maskless. It was insulting to say someone, you are masked. Today, if I tell you you are masked, it is like as I told you, you are insincere. But in the classic world, it was the contrary. It was the opposite. Masks were considered a sign of the complexity, of the richness, of the depth of the human soul, the human spirit. And who were maskless? The slaves. The slaves were called maskless people, people without a persona. They had no personality. And they had no names, no identity, no personal identity. Slaves were called with the master name. That's it. They are the man owned by, the woman owned by. Then on a certain moment they had some nickname, but no personal name, no family name, not at all. And the first event, when a slave was freed, the court gave him, her, the right to have a name, a personal identity. And from that moment on, they became persona, mask. You think it is very far from today? Well, maybe you are more familiar with this picture than with Roman actors. This is the representation of partial identities, which is the core of identity management today. The idea of partial identities. The idea that in different contexts you have different identifiers. Different identifiers mean different access rights. And one of the big issues we have today is linkability between different identifiers. So the possibility to fuse, to merge partial identities, which is very risky, etc., etc. Partial identities. What are they? What are partial identities? They are masks. If you call them partial identities, you feel yourself an engineer, a technologist, a modern scientist. If you call them a mask, you feel yourself a philosopher. But it is exactly the same things. Partial identities are our masks. So, what is then privacy? Let's provide the second definition, and let's start with discussing the final definition. Privacy is a secluded area where you may take refuge, where you may stay alone. Okay, this was the first definition. Privacy is to be masked, but not to hide yourself, but to be recognizable and to have a voice. So privacy is identity. Privacy and identity are the same concept always. They stay together and they fall together. And then the third point we are going to discuss, it concerns boundaries. Because of course, if it is a secluded area, the idea of boundaries, the idea of borders is essential, because an area is secluded, but it means there is a border. So if there is no border, there is no ordered space. An ordered space that is a place implies the idea of borders. And humans have, first of all, bodily boundaries. As many animals, mammalians, birds, we have our territory around us. Social scientists studied it. They classify public space, social space, personal space, intimate space. But this is immaterial, this kind of classification. As a matter of fact, the distance between human beings is something which has a meaning, is meaningful, is not something that happens without any consequence. And almost everybody feel discomfort when their personal space is violated. The personal space is a closer area, and together the intimate space. Personal spaces can be trespassed only in particular circumstances and only by selected others. Your partner could touch you. The medical doctor could touch you. But if a stranger, someone else touch you, maybe you are not so happy. It depends on many factors, by different cultural factors. Probably you are familiar with the notion that in different geographical areas, there are different perception of physical distance. Northern Europe, they need more distance, in Southern Europe less. But what probably you don't know is that there is also a neurological, biological basis. People with a lesion of a special, particular cerebral region called amygdala, which is a region involved in emotion and memory, they don't feel discomfort, they don't feel uneasiness if you trespass the personal space. They do not perceive any longer the existence of personal space. So it means that it is difficult to say what in what terms, but there is even a neurological basis for the territory around human beings. Then there are mental boundaries. What are mental boundaries? Well, early development stages, infants hardly distinguish between themselves and the environment. The newborn are in ongoing relations with the environment. They are continuously confusing themselves with the environment. They are like Nadine in the picture. They exist as individuals, but they have some difficulties to distinguish themselves from the background. They feel themselves confused to the background, to the mother, to other adults. Then slowly, little by little, they start creating the idea, feeling the existence of an inward and outward. And the first idea probably of what is the inward is that the inward, the inner space, is what is evident to himself, to herself, to the baby, but it is not so evident to others. So the baby needs to communicate, and this is one of the main drivers for babies to learn a language, because they discovered that if they do not use a language, if they do not speak, adults cannot understand well what they think, what they have in mind. And this comes from an unpleasant experience, a frustration, because the baby discovers that his wants sometimes are unmet. Sometimes adults, the mother, do not understand. And at the very beginning, the newborns, babies, infants react with rage. They find it insulting. They think that it is something against them. Then at a certain moment, they realize that the inward cannot be easily read by others. And this is a great discovery, because they discover to be individuals. And this is also the moment in which they discover that they can lie. Lying is fundamental to become an individual, because it is the test that what is inside cannot be read by others, so that you are an individual. And being an individual, having an identity, means being unique. What does identity means? Identity literally means sameness. A is identical to A if and only if there is only a unique A. Say we counted twice A and A, what is actually one A. When I say identity, personal identity, I mean there is a unique person like you. You are unique. Each one of us is unique. Each human being is unique. And this is the root of the notion of dignity. Now, dignity has a long history. The notion of dignity started again in ancient Rome, but the word dignitatis, dignity, was used to indicate the social rank, the value of the person in society. So if you were a magistrate, you had a very high dignity. If you were a manual worker, less dignity. So the dignity was the rank, your rank in society. Then there were a series of modification of the concept. Then in the modern age, in the 18th century, Industrial Revolution again, we provided the word dignity with the current definition of dignity that you find in most modern constitutions. For instance, in the Article 1 of the German Constitution, the first article of the German Constitution, after the horrible Nazi experience, the modern Germany Constitution, in the first article, affirms human dignity. And what is the idea of human dignity? Is that each human being is unique. And as far as he is or she is unique, it means cannot be replaced by anyone else. And if you are not replaceable, if you are unique, you are priceless. It means I cannot give you a value. I cannot measure your value, because to measure something, I need at least a comparison. What are measurements? Measurements are comparison between a standard and the object and the item. When I say 2 meters, what does it mean? Twice a piece of ivory, I don't remember, which is in the Museum of Science in Paris. Measurement also always comparison. So if you are unique, you cannot be compared. So you are priceless. Well, now I pose you a question. Don't want to answer this question. I pose you because I want you to ponder, to reflect on this question. The idea that each individual is priceless is still compatible with economic value of personal data? Or with economic value of personal data, we should give up the idea of human dignity? I will not answer. So, let me conclude. We are like drops. We slowly emerge as individuals, thanks to the tension between us and the world. Exactly in the same way as a drop emerges from a mass, like a mass of water, the surface tension creates the drop. And the surface tension for us are our boundaries, and we classify them into bodily, mental, and social boundaries. So each human being is a drop, an unrepeatable combination of these boundaries, which are also, from a different perspective, the relations, the mask we establish with the world. The mask with we stay on the stage. And what we call privacy is anything but the whole of these boundaries, the whole of partial identities, which constitute also our identity, as the skin created by the surface tension constitutes the drop. So, summarizing, boundaries are the walls of the refuge, the walls of the sacred private place, the defense against unwanted invasions. Boundaries are our mask, because they are also the way in which we get in relationship with the world. Our being recognizable, our voice, our identity. Boundary violation threaten the integrity of the drop. Out of metaphor, they threaten the person, integrity, the body, the mind, the person's dignity, the notion of uniqueness. Boundary violation are privacy violation. If I want to respect privacy, I need to respect boundaries, bodily boundaries, mental boundaries, social boundaries. The integrity of boundaries is the essence of privacy. Privacy, identity, and dignity are three facets of the same prism, of the same drop, if you prefer. In order to protect one of them, you must protect them all. And this is my final message, which has also important, I think, technological, practical consequences. When you speak, for instance, of privacy-enhancing technology, they must also enhance dignity. They must also enhance identity. You cannot protect privacy if you damage personal identity or dignity. I repeat, privacy, identity, and dignity are three words, three terms to describe the same item. Thank you.